Good afternoon. Welcome to your Spokane Woodcraft store. Coming at you live on our Facebook page this afternoon. And this is going to be basically part two of our, of our resin casting using Alumilite Slow. Today what we're going to talk about is a method that they call encapsulation. Now that's really just a fancy word for we're going to put something in the mold with the resin. And in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of, I think this is red mallee burl, and we're going to put this in our mold box along with the resin, and we're going to create a blank that will have both Alumilite resin and a little piece of wood into it. And that will just create a little bit of variety in the blank. It will elevate a handmade blank to yet another level of your work. You're going to increase the originality, if you will, of the work that you're doing. I mean, making your own hand-poured acrylic blank makes it original enough and special enough. But when you now begin encapsulating, you take it just one level higher. And let your imagination be your guide when it comes to what you can put into your blank along with that resin. It can be a piece of burl wood like this. It could be, well, basically anything that you can think of. The only caveat to this is that it has to be really, really dry, especially in the case of a piece of wood. Moisture and Alumilite do not mix. Trust me on this. Don't ask me how I know that, but trust me when I say you do not want to mix water and Alumilite. Alumilite is a urethane resin, and in the presence of moisture, it will foam. Think about polyurethane glue, like Gorilla Glue, that kind of thing. You put those two together, you get that foaming action that takes place. Alumilite will do the same thing. So be careful that anything you put into the mold with the resin is already nice and dry. We know this is dry because it came off the same chunk of wood that's in this blank that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes here. So what we're going to do is we're going to prepare our mold box first of all by spraying it with a little bit of mold release. Now, this particular blank I know takes 3.32 ounces of resin. Now, because we're displacing some of the volume with this piece of wood, we have to reduce the overall amount of resin that we use. And for those of you that might be wondering, how do I figure out how much my mold needs? Well, there's a real easy formula to do that. Joel, you going to follow me over here? You take the length times the width times the depth of your mold. And in this case, we're 6 inches long, 1 inch wide, 1 inch deep. Length, width, depth. Multiply those together. That gives you the number of cubic inches in your mold box. So for this one, 6 times 1 times 1, 6 cubic inches. Then you take that number and multiply it by 0.554. Alumilite weighs 0.554 ounces per cubic inch. So 6 times 0.554 comes out to 3.32. So this mold, I'll come back on camera here. So this mold box will take 3.32 total ounces of resin. But again, we're going to displace some of that volume. We're coming back over here, Joel. You like that sound effect there? Joel's not shaking his head. No, we don't like that sound effect. So we're going to displace some of the volume in this mold by simply placing this piece of wood into the mold. Now, there's a number of different ways that you could calculate this. How much resin do I need now? What some people like to do, and probably one of the easiest and quickest ways, would be to put whatever it is you're going to encapsulate into your mold, pour some dry sand or something like that around it, take that out, measure it, see how much you have. That would tell you pretty much at least really closely how much resin you're going to need. Since I know this is going to take 3.3 ounces altogether, I'm going to mix about 2.5 ounces because we are going to displace some of that, and I think that 2.5 ounces is going to get us pretty close. So, Joel, do we have any questions from anybody in the audience? Not yet, huh? All righty. So, folks, if you saw our last video, you saw us use the plastic cups. I'm checking to make sure that my A side of my resin is going in the cup that I have labeled A. We're going to measure out 2.5 ounces. Again, we're going to sneak up on that measurement. Remember Alumilite? There we are, 2.5. And Joel, that pretty much emptied out the bottle. All right, so there's our 2.5 ounces of A. This will be our 2.5 ounces of B. Hopefully we'll get to 2.5. Perhaps I should have done this beforehand, Joel. No? No? All right, well, we came up to 2.2. So what we'll do, because remember, you want to keep these proportions pretty close. So I'm going to pour out 2.2, 2.5. We're going to pour out 0.3 ounces of resin here. Because like I said, we do want to keep these proportions pretty close. There's 0.3, set that off to the side, reweigh that. Put just a tiny bit back in, come back to that 2.2, and there we are. All right, so we have the correct proportions of the two. Now, if you saw part one, you saw us get a big kick out of this red pearl because neither one of us thought it was very red. So today what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the red pearl again, but I'm only going to use the red pearl. We're not going to mix any other colors in with it. Is that okay with you, Joel?
Perfect.
Perfect? Okay. We like to get Joel involved in these demos too. One of these days we'll get him out from behind the camera and we'll put him in front of the camera. All right. Joel, how many pounds per square inch do we want to pressurize our pressure pot to for Alumilite?
If we go by, they can't hear me, but if they go by
Oh.
the manufactured recommendation, I think it's 40.
Yes, very good. 40 PSI. Joel doesn't think you guys can hear him on that side of the camera over there, but he did get the right answer. 40 PSI is what we want to pressurize this to. We're using the Alumilite Slow. Alumilite Slow has a working time of about 12 minutes. So we have lots and lots and lots of time to get this mixed up properly. Looks a lot more red than it did the last time. Isn't this fascinating, folks? I knew I'd get a chuckle out of Joel with that one. All right, so we want to mix thoroughly. Try to avoid introducing any air bubbles to the resin. Even though once we pressurize this, it's going to compress those bubbles to a very, very small size. We still want to try to eliminate or try not to add any more air bubbles than what we absolutely have to. Make sure to get all the way to the bottom of the cup here. Joel's waving his hand at me. Do we have a question? Oh, we have a question from the audience. What is the question, Joel?
Dennis asks, any problems pressurizing at a higher pressure?
You really, the 40 PSI is what the manufacturer recommends. So, you know, I don't know why you would want to go to a higher PSI than that. A lot of pressure pots aren't rated for an awful lot higher than that one. This one is rated up to 60 PSI. But my contention is that the manufacturer, hopefully anyway, knows more about their product than I do. And so if they tell me to pressurize to 40 PSI, you know what? That's good enough for me. Would going to a higher pressure create a problem? I don't believe that it would. No. I just don't, just not sure there's a real need to. Does that answer your question, Dennis? All right. So now we're going to add the part B. Now this is when our 12 minutes actually begins to run. All right. It's a chemical reaction between the two chemicals that causes it to harden. You want to make sure to scrape down the inside of that cup, because remember, you want your proportions pretty close. Joel got after me before we started the presentation today that I kept setting stuff in front of the camera and covering things up, and so I'm trying to be a little more careful. Joel's over there just shaking his head at me. I don't know. Oh, now he's walking away. Joel, I'm just trying to take your direction. Just trying to take your direction.
You need to start taking it more.
Oh, every day, huh? You know, Joel and I really do get along very well. We just have this kind of back and forth thing. Joel and I have known each other for a number of years. How long have we known each other now? 6 years? 8 years?
Between 6 and 8.
Yeah. So we've known each other for quite a while. And we've always kind of had this, this back and forth thing. I'm not sure what started it, where it came from, why, I don't know. Y'all probably really don't care, do you? I'm just trying to fill the airwaves while I'm stirring this resin. Okay, I'll be quiet now. Jazz hands. Oh, we just have too much fun sometimes, Joel. Okay, I think we've got that stirred up pretty well. You guys are probably all hoping that we do anyway, huh? And I'm going to bring this cup back over here so I have a place to put that stir stick. All right, so what we're going to do first, we're going to put a little bit of the resin down into the mold, and we're actually going to let it sit there for just a couple of minutes and give it a chance to kind of start to set up. Just the tiniest little bit. I don't want it to cure necessarily, but I want it to have a chance to set up for a few minutes. And the reason I want to do that is because there's always a possibility that this is going to want to float to the surface of the mold as I'm pouring the resin in. So by letting that set up for just a few minutes and start to get a little gummy, if you will, I can then put this piece of wood down into the mold and it'll kind of stay in place. And it looks like we have another question. Yes?
Rick asks, John, I bought some Alumilite from you a few years back and never opened it. Once the bottles has changed color from clear to brown color, is it still good or do I need to replace it?
in some cases, depending on how many years ago it was, Rick, and what Rick's question was he's got some Alumilite that he bought several years ago. It hasn't been opened, but one of the sides, probably the B side, has turned a kind of yellowish brown color. And his question is the product still good? Well, it's hard telling, to be honest with you. A lot of people have had good luck by taking that B side, and hopefully, Rick, that is the side that's turned color. Take the B side, put it in a bucket with some hot water, and just let it sit there. And every so often, take it out of there and kind of shake it around a little bit and see if it doesn't come back to a more liquid consistency. Normally, when it gets that kind of yellowish brown, it begins to get really, really thick. You can't really dispense it out of the bottle very easily, but by heating it up, shaking it every so often, it will come back to that liquid color. With Alumilite, the shelf life, once you open the bottle, is only about 3 months. So if you've got that from several years ago, you know, I'll be honest with you, Rick, I'm not really sure if you're going to be able to continue to use that or not. Does that help? All right. So we got to make a little bit of noise here for a minute, folks. I got to turn my air compressor on. That might be enough to do it. All right, so we're going to take this piece of wood. It's a noisy thing, isn't it? And we're just going to place it down into the mold. Kind of let that resin begin to settle around it. Joel, so far so good. It's staying in the bottom just where we want it. Now let's see what happens. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. We'll let that sit for a minute and see if that wood is actually going to soak any of that resin in. And if it does, we'll kind of top off the mold a little bit. But I don't think it's going to. I think it's going to set in there just fine. The cup is beginning to get just the tiniest little bit warm. That's an indication that that chemical reaction is happening. So now we're going to carefully put the mold into our little rack. Are you following this, Joel? Put the mold on our rack here. This thing makes it so much easier to put things into and out of the pressure pot. Just built in the shop using some scraps I had laying around. Get the lid put on, all lined up nice. Any other questions yet, Joel?
Nope.
Okay. That either means we're doing a really good job with this demo, or Rick and Dennis are the only ones watching. I suppose it could be either or, huh? All right. Always make sure that your lid is on good and tight, depending on what kind of a pressure pot you have. Of course, if you don't have Woodcraft's California Air Tools pressure pot, you really ought to come on down to the store and pick one up. These things are awesome. They're going quick, but don't worry, I got more on the way. All right. Let's Suppose I should close the drain valve from when I let the pressure off earlier, huh? Probably be a good idea, wouldn't it? All right. Almost there. I know it's noisy, folks. I apologize for that. All right. I am so sorry for the noise, but we're up to 40 psi, and that's where we're going to let it sit. Now, this particular resin that we're using has a 2 to 4 hour demold time. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to bring you the grand reveal of this particular blank. However, we did one last night in a little bit larger size. I'll hold this up so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. So you can see that we've encapsulated a piece of that red mallee burl into what is essentially a blank to create a handle of some kind for, say, I don't know, a pizza cutter or an ice cream scoop, gardening tool, whatever you can think of that you might need a handle for. Or I suppose you could just take the whole thing, turn it around, and make something decorative out of it. I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can make with this stuff. So what we're going to do, just to kind of give you a better idea of what it looks like, we're actually going to go over to the bandsaw, and we're going to cut this into 4 pin blanks. How's that sound? Woo, hoo, hoo, hoo. I hear all the cheers and everything going off from this side of the camera. All right, so Joel, if you'll follow me over to the bandsaw. All right. So we'll set our fence for as close to the middle of this as we can eyeball it to anyway. Now you'll notice that I've got my fence set so that my short or narrow side of the fence is facing outward. That allows me to put the bearings in the right position and make the cut where I need to. All right, so let me get a pair of safety glasses. I don't think those will fit over my eyeglasses, Joel. Because remember, we always want to do, what is it we say, Joel? Safety first. So eyeglasses and some hearing protection. And here we go. Now you can see I'm taking my time going through my cut here, using the fence as a guide. I'm going to hold it up against the fence and push it through using my push stick. Keep my fingers out of the way. We're all the way through the cut. We'll come straight out the other side. Wow, look at that. So now we're going to do the same thing. And one more cut. A little hung up on the throat plate there, I think. All right. Set that aside. Bring our blade to a stop using the handy dandy foot brake. And Joel, we'll go back over to the other table now. Actually, we could just stay over there. I just like watching Joel roll this thing around the room, that's all. All right. Still holding good and steady at 40 psi. So now, this will give you a much better idea. Are you getting a good view of it there, Joel? Mm-hmm. Of what our blank looks like with a piece of red mallee burl encapsulated in it. So when you turn this, you're going to end up with some blue acrylic and the red mallee burl, both in your pen blank, or in your finished pen, I should say. It's already in your pen blank, isn't it? So there we are.
Beautiful.
Aw, Joel likes it. All right. So we have a lot of fun doing these, and I hope you enjoy them. So thank you again. Have a good afternoon.